Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Malarick, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on the Advanced Cellular Frame. The Advanced Cellular Frame is the latest innovation from Marketing Systems Group in support of the research community. I am a Senior Vice President at MSG. I've been at MSG for over 30 years, since its inception, dating back to 1987. I've been involved with nearly every aspect of the Genesis product line, from design, development, implementation, and support. And we are proud and happy to discuss more about this latest innovation on our part. Just to let everyone know, there will be a short Q&A at the end of this presentation. Feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we will try to get to some of them at the end. For those that I can't get to, I will certainly respond to you individually by email. And even beyond the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or to any of the account people at Marketing Systems Group. This webinar is going to cover a couple different topics here. We're going to talk about basically the evolution of cellular sampling. Cellular sampling has been around for well over 10 years. It has certainly evolved over those 10 to 12 years, and we'll certainly look at the different aspects of what has occurred over that period of time. We're going to talk about the construction of the latest frame, really take a look at how this frame really just takes the next steps forward in terms of being able to create a viable sampling frame based on cellular telephone numbers. We'll talk about the advantages that the advanced cell phone frame offers. There's a couple different sampling methodologies that can be employed using this newest product, and we're anxious to show them to you. So, dating back over 10 plus years ago, the first type of cellular sampling that was available was simply a simple RDD sample. Basically, it contained all possible cellular telephone numbers that resided in dedicated cellular 1000 blocks. This basically gave you nearly 100% coverage of all the active cell phone numbers in the country, but it also included a lot of non-working numbers and a lot of unassigned numbers. It basically is just a database of telephone numbers. There really wasn't a lot of demographic information associated with those telephone numbers. There was really no listed information associated with those telephone numbers. All we really had is the telephone number and pretty much what rate center it originated from. Beyond that, over the time, as more people started using cell phones and more people were doing online shopping and putting their cell phones out in the public domain, commercial compilers started developing databases and collecting that information and really putting together small consumer files that had cellular telephone numbers. And these were advantageous because now you had some geography associated with a cell phone number, you had some demographic data associated with a telephone number, and it really was, it enabled us to do some targeting of cell phone users. And then up until today, as technologies and databases become more prevalent and more advanced and more data becomes accessible, we now have what we're calling our advanced cell phone frame, which really takes advantages of both of the earlier products that have been out there in terms of coverage and the coverage that you get with a traditional cellular RDD sample, plus the efficiency gains that you get with getting some additional information such as geography and demographics. So like I mentioned, the original cellular RDD frame was developed over 10 years ago. Again, it was just a simple database of all possible numbers. They were defined by rate centers, basically where the rate center were the 1000 block, which is the first 7 digits of a telephone number, where they were assigned, where they originated. And the really only sampling methodology that was available at that time was purely a pure EFSA. And one thing to keep in mind about an RDD frame is it contains both listed numbers, which in the RDD frame was unidentifiable at that point, and unlisted numbers, which are numbers that that are active but we don't know anything about, and then the unassigned numbers. But again, this RDD frame way back when really had no information in it beyond the telephone number. The RDD frame offered challenges in terms of geographic stratifications. Because they were defined by rate centers don't conform to geography that researchers used. It doesn't conform to census geography. They don't conform to postal geography. It's telephony geography. And it's really based on where the telephone companies run their wires and how they originate out of the switching centers. So getting those 1,000 blocks to map back to geography that makes sense for all of us was certainly a very big challenge. The other problem with the cellular RDD frame was the fact that people move and take their cell phones. So you have people who have moved out of your target geography, and you have people that have moved into your target geography. And the problem with the traditional RDD frame is it couldn't identify that migration. And so it caused some undercoverage in terms of it was excluding the inward migration, and it caused some data inefficiencies because you were contacting people who have since moved out of your target geography. In addition, really the only demographic information that was available for the traditional RDD frame was a large aggregation at the rate center level. And it was such a large geography that it really was difficult to use beyond much of trying to identify maybe a higher ethnic area, race and ethnicity. But beyond that, using demographics at the rate centers really didn't have much of a efficiency gain whatsoever. As consumer lists were being developed, again, these were developed by a lot of different commercial companies, and they varied in sizes and they varied in the sources that they used to put them together. But it did offer researchers the ability to buy lists of cell phone numbers that were known or essentially known to be within the geographic domain that they were trying to sample, and it had some demographic information. So it allowed to target, individuals of certain age groups, certain race groups within a specified geography. The other advantage with consumer lists is that those numbers tend to be had a higher working rate, right? Because they knew information about these cell phone numbers. People have put their information out in the public domain. These compilers capture that information, compile their databases. So there's a higher likelihood that those phone numbers are working. One of the problems with consumer lists is, again, they tended to be small, and they certainly were limited in scope. And because they're limited in scope and they're limited on a particular segment of the population, there's probably bias in those samples because you weren't really getting a true listed sample. You were getting a sample of a certain type of demographic that may tend to be not what you're looking to target. Another concern that was with consumer data is a lot of the data was based on billing data. So the geography associated with a particular phone number was associated with a billing address. And to give an example where there's some issues here, you can have a family plan that have maybe 4 or 5 telephone numbers on it. They're all tied back to a single billing address, which could be the residence. However, there could be a couple kids away at school, or they moved out on their own. Their parents are still paying for their service, but their address associated with those telephone numbers are still back at the billing address, which happened to be the original residence. And then there's also the business plans, and many of us have our cell phones on business plans. And again, all that's back to a central billing number, typically the office or the corporate headquarters for the business entity. So you have all these cell phone numbers of individuals that they use for a mixture of personal and business. But again, the address associated with those cell phones are tied back to the billing address. And that, again, leads to inefficiencies in using this type of sample for in certain designs. And again, as I said, they're limited, right? So that these databases are limited. And again, a lot of that has to do with privacy concerns. So again, the data that really feeds into the compilation of these files is basically people who have put their information out there in the public domain. And this takes us to today's topic, which is the Advanced Cellular Frame. And the Advanced Cellular Frame actually builds on all the positives that the cellular RDD frame offered and what the consumer lists offered. It provides the traditional coverage that a cellular RDD offers. So it includes every single cell phone number in the RDD frame, but it also includes all the efficiency gains that you get from the consumer list. It's no longer based solely on billing data. We are leveraging newer technologies and newer data sources that have become available over the past couple years, to really do a better job in terms of linking a name and an address back to a cell phone number. And because of this information, we also have a larger breadth of data in terms of household and individual demographic that we can associate with a cell phone number. So again, it just makes this a more robust, a more filled out frame to use for cellular sampling. In addition to that, we can also add in or merge in some lifestyle and some segmentation attributes should a particular design require that. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the construction of the frame, basically the nuts and the bolts of the Advanced Cellular Frame, how it's put together, what it's comprised of, and really what makes it leaps and bounds better than some of the consumer files that are out there today. The frame, like I said, is built on the base of the cellular RDD frame. So the chassis, or think of this as an automobile, the base that we're using here, the chassis that the frame sits on, is the complete cellular RDD frame. And there's roughly 535 million telephone numbers in that frame. And the RDD frame consists of listed numbers. There's a component of listed numbers. There's a component of unlisted numbers, basically numbers that are working, but we don't know anything beyond that. And the unassigned numbers, right? Because an RDD frame, a true RDD frame, contains every possible number. So a percentage of the numbers in the RDD frame are unassigned and non-working. So talk a lot about the listed part, because that's really the engine that drives the advanced cell phone frame. The geography, well, first of all, every number that's in the listed frame that really defines it to be in the listed frame has a name, an address, and geography associated with that telephone number. So, and because we have address information for such a large percentage of the numbers, 244 million is a very large number to have this information for. We have geography down to the census block, and we have postal geography down to the zip +4. So it really enables you to target very specific, very low-level geographies beyond what we were able to do with older versions of cell phone frames. Demographics that are available, they're your typical demographics. We have individual demographics, including age, gender, race, education, religion, language, the normal stuff that you would typically see for an individual. We also have household level demographics, including income, presence of children within certain age groups, length of residence, home value. So all the typical household level demographics that you would normally see. We also have lifestyle variables associated with cell phone numbers, the propensity of people to do one thing or another, to buy this or to do that. They're in the table. And we also have prepaid flag. And prepaid flag, I think for a couple of researchers, is a very important attribute, because it enables them to use it as a predictor for people of a lower socioeconomic background. Prepaid basically means exactly what it means. The people are buying prepaid phones versus getting on a year-to-year subscription with a particular carrier. As I mentioned, we do have name and address associated with, again, in the listed frame for 244 million telephone numbers. However, in our process, the name and address is a post-sampling append, which means is that in the advanced cell phone frame, we have indicators that there's a name and an address available, but we don't actually append the actual name and address until after the sample has been selected. And we do this primarily to ensure that the most up-to-date name and address information is appended to that cell phone that we ultimately, sell to you guys. So because, you got to remember, databases become static, people change. There's always a lag between updates and all this. So it's kind of a fluid environment in terms of linking cell phones to names and addresses. So one way that we can try to at least improve the recency and provide up-to-date information is to do the name address append at the time the sample is selected and as we're sending it out the door. One other big advantage of the listed frame is the high working rate that we see with these phone numbers. We've looked at a variety of samples and run a variety of tests. The working rate averages around 95%, which is a very realistic, very good figure to have for the listed frame. The fact that you have such a high working rate, two things: you don't necessarily need to screen the listed numbers because it's only on average you're going to have 5% of those numbers not being working, but also lends it to more credibility based on the other data that's associated with that telephone number. Because the telephone number is working and it's constantly being updated, the ancillary data that we're associating with that telephone number is probably more up to date as well. So the geography and the demographics that we're providing along with the telephone number is probably going to be much more accurate than what's been available with other types of databases. I'll talk a little bit about how the frame is actually constructed in terms of how do we associate a name and an address to a cell phone number. Obviously, that's the key with any viable database project. If you can get the correct name and the correct address associated with a telephone number, then everything else kind of falls into place. We're leveraging technologies that we have access to that are used in identity authentication, to prove to someone that you are really who you are, especially in the digital online world. And coupled with that, the validation of digital transactions. A lot of people, especially this time of year, are doing online shopping. So a lot of validation takes place between cell phone numbers, which is one of the pieces of information that a lot of e-commerce people want collected along with your email, and obviously with names and addresses. So all that information is validated, and that's one of the sources that we tap into to improve the linkage rates between cell phone names and addresses. There are obviously more other authoritative sources that we draw on. There are just dozens and dozens of them, including DMVs. So that really does a good job in terms of linking names and addresses back, or names back to an address, which is really the residence, because most people have to have their home address on their license. Because we're leveraging these new technologies, especially when it comes to the identity authentication and the validation of digital transactions, it's allowing for us for a high linkage rate. So we have access to a lot more data than you typically would get from the older versions of the commercial databases that only leverage billing data or stuff that was out in the public domain. A lot of this stuff, a lot of the information that we're tapping is kind of in the background there. You can't typically get out of that information, which is why we have at least 244 million numbers in the listed in the advanced cell phone frame that have a name and an address and geography associated with it. So just to put it in perspective, the US population for people 15 and older is 269 million. So 240, so people 15 and older are those that typically are going to have a cell phone. 244 is 90% of that figure. So in terms of trying to measure the coverage, a couple things come. I mean, these are kind of loose numbers here, but if you assumed everybody who was 15 and older had exactly one cell phone, then our coverage would be 90%. Obviously, that's not the case because not everybody 15 and older has a cell phone, and we know that a lot of people have more than one cell phone number. Additionally, there's no data in the advanced cell phone frame for minors, so that all that data is stripped out. So the names and addresses that we're associating with cell phones are only going to be adults. So again, this kind of points, we don't know precisely what the coverage is, but we're going to say it's somewhere around 90%. Could be a little bit higher, could be a bit lower, and certainly will vary based on geography. But we're honing in around 90% coverage for the listed frame. We have improved accuracy with the advanced cell phone frame. As I mentioned, it's no longer solely based on billing data. We're able to leverage other sources to kind of fill out. As an example, getting back to that family that had 5 cell phones and a couple of their kids are off to school. If those kids are actually are off to school and they have say living in an off-campus apartment, and they put their name and phone out there, they're doing a lot of online transactions, then the address that we're going to end up in the advanced cell phone frame will be the address where they are at school, and not necessarily the address at home. Because validations and authentication takes place continuously, the data that feeds into the advanced cell frame is continuously updated, and it's corroborated using multiple sources. So again, it's not a single source. It's not putting a lot of credence in one area or other. It's just it's using a lot of different moving parts to really try to corroborate and create a high accurate linkage between cell phone and names and addresses. One final point I want to make is that we actually reconstruct our frame each quarter from scratch. We create a brand new RDD frame. We go out and get all this information linked to the cell phones as every single quarter. So it's not like the database is sitting static for a long period of time. This is, again, our frame is constantly being updated. And I just wanted to mention, like I said, that our frame is updated completely from scratch every single quarter. So why use the advanced cell phone frame? There's a lot of reasons why you should be using the advanced cell phone frame. One of the bigger ones is that it really does a very good job addressing migration. It addresses people who have moved into a particular target sample geography, and it identifies the people who have moved out of your target geography. And that results in improved coverage and a more efficient sample. We have improved targeting, right? You can target any of the demographics we have in our database. You can target any of the geography that we have in this database. You can target. It also offers you a couple different sample designs that you can employ depending on the needs of your project. If you still want to do an RDD, a traditional Epsom sample, this frame really creates a more advanced and more improved version of that. Think of it this way: you have a traditional RDD, and but instead of having the listeds based on the rate centers that the geography is associated with, the listed component is now based on people who have moved in, and the people who have moved out have been excluded from your frame. So in essence, you're creating a more efficient RDD frame. It still includes the unlisteds, it still includes the unassigned numbers, but your efficiency gain again is coming from the net migration. This frame also accommodates disproportionate sampling. You can create an RDD frame and you can put all the listeds in one bucket, and you can put all the not listeds in a second bucket. and then you can sample each bucket disproportionately. Typically you probably oversample the lists a little bit more to gain efficiency and without sacrificing coverage, and you would undersample your not listed component, which includes the unlisteds and the not workings, but it still provides a probability of selection for every single cell phone number in your frame, and every single cell phone number in your geographic frame has an opportunity to be selected. Getting more into our improved RDD methodology, which I just touched upon, because all the listed numbers are pre-identified, we know where these listed numbers belong. We can place them in the correct geographic stratum within the RDD frame. You have to remember the traditional RDD frame had no listed component. It was just telephone numbers. So you didn't know which one of those telephone numbers in an RDD sample were listed or unlisted. So our improved RDD methodology has all that information pre-identified. So when you go and generate an RDD sample, we have already adjusted for the inward and outward migration. So again, if you were doing an RDD sample in Philadelphia County, for instance, anybody who moved outside of Philadelphia with their cell phone, moved across the country to California, would not be included in the frame. However, people who have moved to Philadelphia from various parts of the country would be included in the sample frame. So basically, it's just a replacing of the listeds, but the listeds that end up in the RDD component, in the listed component of the RDD frame, belong in Philadelphia County. And then the other component of the frame would be the unlisteds and the unassigned. They're still defined the same way that we've always defined them, defined by the rate center geography, and they would be the other component within the RDD frame. Again, every number is represented in the frame, and you still have near perfect coverage. And because we have such a large, again, because the RDD frame contains the listeds, the unlisted, and the unassigned, it's still an Epsom sample, right? You're still going through and you're sampling each number at an equal probability. So by definition, it's still an Epsom sample. The big advantage here is that we've knocked out the people who are out of area, and we've included the people who should be in there, people who normally wouldn't have been in the target geography under the traditional RDD methodology. This is an example of a stratified approach. Basically, this is looking at Washington, D.C. You can separate the frame into your listed and your not listed. The listed is the light blue. The not listed is the pink. And within an RDD, traditional RDD, you have some list components. Some listeds are going to be inside your target geography, and some listeds are going to be outside your geography. For Washington, D.C., within the listed component, we have 590,000 numbers. 23% of the frame are outside of Washington, D.C. So with the stratified approach, we can exclude those completely from the frame, and you no longer need to worry about sampling them. The listed numbers that are inside DC come from two places. They come from the area code 202, which defines Washington, D.C. in the traditional RDD frame, and it also includes the inward migration people who have since moved into Washington, D.C. who do not have a Washington, D.C. area code. So you net those two together, you end up with 500,000 total listed numbers in Washington, D.C. that truly are in Washington, D.C. And then the other component of this is the not listed, and these are going to be defined by the traditional rate center methodology. They include the unlisted, they include the unassigned numbers, but again, it fills out the frame, and you can sample the listed, not listed strata at differing rates to improve efficiency without sacrificing coverage. So, and takeaways from this example, 39% of the listed numbers that are in the DC frame are a result of inward migration. That's a significant number. Under the traditional RDD methodology, that 39% would not have been included in your frame. Conversely, 25% of the cellular numbers in the traditional RD frame that are listed numbers fall outside of Washington, D.C. These are people we do not want to contact. These numbers would have to have been screened out during data collection, and you would have incurred additional costs with that. As I mentioned before, you can sample at differentiating rates, so the listed stratum can be sampled at a higher rate to improve efficiency. And one thing I do want to point out, and which many of you are probably aware of, there's always going to be some undercoverage, and that undercoverage will exist with people who have migrated into your geography of interest, your sample frame geography, whose phones are unlisted. So they're not included in the frame because we don't know where they are. They're just completely unidentifiable at this point. So that's where you're going to incur some under coverage, just to make that point clear. Some final thoughts here on the advanced cell phone frame. The advanced cell phone frame allows for inclusion of nearly every cellular telephone number for any target geography, right? Because it's built on the base of the RDD frame that includes every possible cellular telephone number. You get efficiency gains because now you can employ a disproportionate sample design to basically improve the efficacy and the production of your sample. But it also still provides for a probability of selection for all telephone numbers. Using the improved RDD methodology, which we talked about a few minutes ago, will result in a more efficient Epsom sample, again, without sacrificing coverage, because we've adjusted with that we've adjusted the migration issue, so it takes into account the net migration of people across the country. And because this frame is so much larger, the listed frame in particular, it's 45% of the RDD frame, of the complete RDD frame. And a more complete universe implies that you will have a more representative sample. So the more people in your frame, that in your total universe that you can actually identify and you sample that, the more representative of that sample will be of your target population. So we consider this to be these 4 points are certainly big selling points to the advanced cell phone frame. We think it just brings a lot to the table, and yeah, it's just a good thing. So I do want to thank you for your time today. Like I said, we're going to have some questions here, but that we're going to get to that have come over the web since the start of this webinar. Again, I may not get to all these, and I will certainly respond to everyone's questions by email as time permits. I'll try to answer as many at the moment. Again, if you want to reach out to us outside of this webinar, feel free to email me directly. You can email any of the people at our sales staff, or go to the info page on our website and submit a request, and we will be happy to get back in touch with you. One of the questions that did come in is, I'm going to read this verbatim. If names and addresses are appended as a post-sampling process, what happens if the appended address is either outside the target's sample frame or it's missing altogether? So because it's a real-time application at the back end in terms of appending names and addresses, For studies where the name and address is required for every sample record, and we certainly can provide that, we overpull our sample slightly to ensure and to compensate for that out of area and some of the names and addresses that come back missing. Any address that gets appended that is deemed to be out of area from the original sample frame is removed and replaced with a subsequent piece of sample that is in area. Again, the reason we do this at the back end, depending on the names and addresses, is to try to provide a more efficient sample in terms of names and addresses associated with a cell phone number, because this data is continuously changing. So instead of sitting on a static database for 2 or 3 or 4 months, we're actually trying to get you the most up-to-date information possible. Another question that came in is, and this is actually a very good question. This modified RDD methodology for cellular sampling that you guys have come up with seems quite intriguing. Any concerns about coverage or bias? The short answer is no, because again, it's built on the traditional RDD frame. So for any geographic frame, every possible telephone number is included in the sample frame. This includes the listed numbers, the not listed numbers, and the unassigned. The only difference between this methodology and the traditional RDD design is that the listed component has been altered slightly to address the migration concerns. So your coverage actually improves by the inclusion of the inward migrating people, and your out of area is decreased because we've excluded people who we know are outside the geographic scope of your frame. It's still an Epson design because every single number that in that RDD frame has an equal probability of selection. Again, we've just adjusted the known numbers to really improve coverage and limit the costs. And the final question that we got here is, and everyone always wants to know this, is what do we get? What information is included in the sample that we get from you guys? It really comes down to what it is you need. I mean, MSG has always prided itself being very flexible and providing custom layouts for any particular project or any particular design on a project by project basis. So for Advanced Cell, you can get something as simple as just a telephone number and some basic geography, or you can get all the information. You can get the phone, the name, the address, all the geography, and every single demographic variable. So it runs the gamut, but we tend to be flexible in that regard. And again, it's really what you guys want. We don't believe in the one size fits all mantra. I mean, we take pride in trying to customize everything we do specific to the individual project or individual client need. That's about all the time we have for the questions. Like I said, the additional questions that we got in, I will certainly respond to them via email. If you have other questions outside this webinar, again, feel free to email me. My contact information is up there. It's dmalaric@m-s-g.com, or feel free to reach out to your account representative. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure being able to describe in a little more detail our new advanced cell phone frame, and I encourage you to at least give it a try and see how it works for your individual needs. Thank you very much and have a good day.